Hi, this is Marilyn Fidmont with the Good Shepherd Christian Church of Houston, Texas. Today's message is entitled Starting Over. It comes from the Gospel of John 21 verses 1 through 8, a familiar passage in which Jesus meets his disciples at the seashore and re-invites them into ministry. Hear these words. After this, John revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you caught any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the other side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in for the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his clothes, for he was stripped for work, and sprang into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire with fish lying on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish. This is the word of God for the people of God. As we continue on the journey, the post-resurrection experiences of Jesus with his disciple, this is the fourth one reported in the Gospel of John. We know that in many ways, John's gospel is different than that of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. His gospel is intended to reveal the lordship, the messiahship of Jesus Christ, not just as a historical fact, but how Jesus is the one who shapes and informs our faith. He is not just this little carpenter's son from Nazareth, but is in fact the incarnation, the embodiment of God, the God with us, Emmanuel. That is who John presents to us. So John wants us to cling to our faith, believe it, hold tenaciously to it. Remember, he began this whole gospel with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God, and nothing was created without him." Jesus is that Word who has always been. And so we move now into the capturing and forming and fashioning of our faith. That's what John wants us to have. And this text helps us get there. If ever we needed our faith awakened, it is probably during this time. Goodness knows we need to recognize the goodness of Jesus Christ, because modern history in this moment is helping us to claim our faith. So John finishes his gospel with the same confidence in which he began, and he gives us these clues. He says that Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life. That's the entirety of this message, to bring to us the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and it gives us the impetus to start over, that humanity can start again. So this final appearance, Jesus goes to the side of the water, to the seashore. And it's interesting that we know the disciples have probably gone through a lot of experiences over the days and weeks, perhaps since Jesus had died and been resurrected. They had seen him. They knew he was alive, and they were told to wait. And sometimes waiting gets to be debilitating. If there's ever a time now, we recognize how debilitating and long waiting can become. I remember as a child, it seemed like Christmas came every 2 years. But a lot of things have changed since then, and so birthdays seem to be quarterly as I age beyond my time and season. But this waiting period in which we are in right now, many of us have become fascinated with things. So our flower beds are lovely, our backyards are being cleaned, housework is becoming, a daily part of our living, except it seems to never finish, but we're still waiting to resume our normal lives that will never really be normal. So Jesus finds these disciples, and they've virtually gone full circle, because remember, he called them from the edge of the water. They were fishermen. He'd met them at the water's edge before. So this is a recalling and a reclaiming and re-engaging of that initial call. I don't think it's unusual at all that they went back fishing. I don't think it's unusual that they went back. You know, whenever you've had an extreme trauma, something that's happened that's shattered your world, that has caused you to recognize that nothing that you knew you can count on, what are they going to do? So they, in their anxiety and their tension, they went back to the thing that they knew they could do, and they did it well. They made their living fishing. That was the one thing they could count on. Everything from the last 3 years had been so different, so extraordinary. They had traveled around with Jesus. They had been welcomed into homes. They had been on healing missions. They had been on the great crusades, let's say the preaching circuit with Jesus. They had done all of those things for 3 years. They had left their nets and followed around. They were the inner circle. They were the in crowd. They had been through it all with him. And suddenly, that was over. How do you redefine yourself? How do you reclaim your identity when so much has changed? Everything had changed for them. They went from being just ragtag fishermen to being the inner circle of Jesus, and now that Jesus had died, yet been resurrected, still, what did that do about their place? One thing they knew, they could still fish. That was the one safe thing they knew. And often in the midst of crisis, people will return to the thing that is familiar and the thing they know. Whether it's negative or positive, a crisis will bring out the best or the worst of who we are. How oftentimes do people slip back into addiction because things change too radically and too drastically? Or how often have people used that very experience to move forward into newness of life, to find a way forward, to embrace the challenges that are before them? And they, in fact, do start over. They start over. So these fishermen, these disciples, had been wrestling with their identity and their purpose, getting restless, sitting around, kind of waiting. And all of a sudden, with their frazzled nerves and their dreams scattered, Peter, who we can always count on, says, "I'm going fishing. Who's with me? Come on, boys, let's go." And they all agree, let's go. Back to normal, back to what was familiar. So they get out all the things that they knew to use, cleaned the boats, checked the nets, got the weights just right, did all the mending, did all the prep work, get themselves together, pack up, and go fishing. Fished all night. I remember my brothers fishing with cane poles and a bucket full of earthworms, and once they got the hang of it, they were really pretty good, and it wasn't unusual for them to come home with a whole stringer full of fish. For the disciples, this undoubtedly gave them comfort. The familiarity of the waves, the rhythm of the waves, the hint of the sun going down and moon coming up, mist on the water, the rocking back and forth, knowing how each one performed their task, that they can count on whose strength to do what, the tug of the nets, the smell of the water, the coolness of night, the perspiration. It was all familiar. They fished and they fished, except it didn't work. Everything that they knew said it should have. Everything was in place, everything that was necessary for a good catch. They had been a team together. They knew one another's pull and tug. They knew how to maneuver the boat. These excursions had been so consistent, well established, except this time it didn't work. Fished all night and there was nothing. And I would imagine, if I understand anything at all about human nature, when something doesn't work and you've done it as a team, you start kind of grumbling under your breath and kind of pointing at the other one or suggesting you didn't pull your weight and you didn't throw the net right, and gee whiz, who forgot snacks? I can imagine these guys were starting to get a little annoyed with one another and thinking that, well, we don't even know how to fish anymore. Because one thing is for certain, we are validated oftentimes by tangible means, that our work benefits and results in tangible resources and assets. For them, it was a net full of fish. For us, it may be our careers, our homes, our cars, any number of things that said this says that I'm worth something, that I have these tangible resources that I can identify these. They say that I matter, that my work ethic brought something forward. Look at me, I'm productive. And sometimes we don't know what to do when it doesn't work. Exhausted and disappointed with nothing to show but an empty boat and one another. Maybe they were muttering. They're just going to bring the boat back in. And all of a sudden someone calls out, "Children, did you catch any fish?" No, we didn't. And I can't imagine what they thought, because as it reports, they didn't initially recognize Jesus. But when you are at your wit's end, and you've tried everything that should have worked and it didn't, exhausted, almost home, and someone tells you to start over, that's an odd request. And most of us, truthfully, would prefer not to. But these guys really didn't have anything to lose. And this man, who is not a fisherman himself, standing on the shore, calls out, "Throw your net, cast your net on the other side." They had nothing to lose. I guess maybe that's the good part, because that's what they did. They cast over on the other side. And they began to catch fish. In the midst of this current pandemic, we are also having spiritual awakenings. And they've manifested themselves in several ways. One of them for us as church, for a lot of congregations are beginning to recognize that there's more than one way to do and be church. We've always thought of it as being in a particular location with certain things that were normal, they were ordinary, they were tradition. We counted on them day in, day out, Sunday in, Sunday out. This pandemic has encouraged us and compelled us to find new ways to reach people with the gospel. People who weren't coming inside of our doors are now listening and viewing and being challenged by the message of Jesus Christ through technology. We've had to cast our net on the other side. We've had to look at our abilities and our talents and see what's really in our collective arsenal to bring the gospel into the world. Cast the net on the other side is what he says. Throw it over there, because the truth is, their boat, they were in between failure, nothing, and on the opposite side was success. They were in between. Sometimes maybe we need to get our ideas and our traditions out of the way so that we can really capture what Jesus has before us. We have to recognize sometimes that even the one who isn't of our particular career, as Jesus was not a fisherman, but he understood fishing, he said, try that. Sometimes we need to listen to some other voices, and maybe they can give us a word that we haven't heard. So Jesus begins to call them back, calls them out of their exhaustion, urges them to start over, because there were fish. The possibility of fish was there. They just needed to readjust their way of thinking and functioning and being while in that traditional boat. They needed to make some adjustments. And I would ask us, how many times does Jesus have to show up on our muddy shores and look out and assess our situation, can see better than we can see it? Can see that perhaps the school of fish is running on one side, but we are so caught up in our tradition of the other, we can't make an adjustment. And so he has to challenge us to just do the simple thing, the thing that made so much sense, just try the other side. And there were the fish. He's also revealing to us the mystery and the unmeasurable possibilities that are before us. We just have to push ourselves to start over. So that's what they did, and they bring in all these fish. And Jesus is telling them and giving them an example, a mandate of what it means to become fishers of people. That's what he was calling them back to. So he gave them a living, tangible example through what they knew, the fish that would keep them and sustain them and provide income for them. But what he was reminding them is, as I said earlier, recalling and reclaiming. I told you I'd make you fishers of people. And sometimes what this means is you have to get out of the comfort zone and go to where they are. You have to cast your net out across the horizon of humanity and proclaim the gospel to them. That's what Jesus is doing in this test. It's not just about you in the boat. It's about all those out there among you. Cast a bigger, wider net with this gospel. And so they bring this haul in. Peter has jumped into the water and he's gone onto shore, and they recognize this as Jesus, and he tells them, come on, come and eat with me, come sup with me. He has bread and loaves. He had bread and fish already going. He had started breakfast. I don't know where he got his fish, but he already had some. But he invites them to come and have this meal. It's a different meal than their last supper together, where he took bread and cup and said, this is a new covenant in my name. This meal is a ministry meal. He went old school with them. He took them back to remember when we were out there together and there were hungry multitudes, and we took bread and fish and we fed the multitudes. This is the kids' sack lunch meal, where it says, remember that the possibility of spreading the good news is now in your hands. You have to start over. Remember how we did this? This is a meal of recollection with how they healed people, how they proclaimed good news, how they went into all the villages. This is a message that says, oh yes, we can start over. Even if Jesus doesn't go with us, we can do this. This is that kind of meal. And he met them where they were. Jesus will meet us where we are and remind us of our possibilities, our potential, the ability that we have to proclaim the message of the gospel. And he won't reprimand us for just, hey, you guys got back in the boat and went. No, that's not what matters to Jesus in this text. What matters is, I'm going to put you guys back together so you can start over and be the people that I've called you to be. So when I leave, when I ascend into heaven, you have the impetus to keep this going, and you can cast the net far and wide, and cast the net in such a way that for generations and generations to come, that people will believe that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. Cast a wider net. Don't get caught so much up in tradition. And that's one of the problems that we've all had recently. We've been relying so much on tradition that we forget that there is wider, deeper waters in which we can fish, and there we will find humanity waiting to hear the good news. There we will find people whom we can help with the simplicity of food and the kindness of words. There is where Jesus is telling us to go fishing. That's what he's reminding us. Start over. Start the process over. We've heard reports recently that it's almost as if the world, because humanity had to go home, the world is healing itself. The environment is healthier. We're starting over. Perhaps we can start over with less greed and less contempt for the other, and recognize that all of us are just children on a journey, on this peculiar house we call the earth, and that we need one another. We need to add our fish to the fish that Jesus has provided. We need to give ourselves as he gave himself. He meets us, and we need to meet him. Will you be willing to start over? To free yourself from the unintentional tomb of tradition? Sometimes there are things about tradition we love, and there are things about tradition we need to let go. Come and dine, Jesus says. I'm going to meet you on the shore. And I'm going to show you a more excellent way. May God bless you to hear him call, to start over, and cast your net on the other side. May God be with us and keep us. And may God's face shine upon us and give us peace. Amen.